Hello, this is Andy from Starseed. A little comment before we begin. This is actually the sixth part of the creation series that we are doing. So if you haven't seen the other parts one, you should definitely do that. So creation part one is about the creation of God and consciousness in general, like how God and consciousness formed. Then we got creation part two. This is the evolution of the souls and the dimensions, like how souls and dimensions came to be. Then part 3 is shaping the touchable universe. So this video talks basically about the creation of this universe, of this touchable universe by higher dimensional beings and the shaping of it, like the creation of death and the reincarnation cycle, stuff like that. And with creation part 4, this dawn of interstellar civilizations, it speaks for itself. Like, it speaks of the very first civilizations that came to be. So when we look at the first civilizations, immediately go to Lyra and Draco, but it's not what you're talking about, because Lyra and Draco are the first civilization in this sector of the universe. So part 4 actually talks about the creation of the actual very first civilizations, of which the Lyons and the Carians were actually part of. And so in creation part 5, so the one before this, we talked about the creation of Lyra. So we went over the entire story of the creation of Lyra, from their creation until where they are now. And so this video, as the title suggests, is the creation of the draconians, wherein we will look at how the draconians were created. So again, if you haven't seen the other parts, make sure to watch them, and if you have already, great, then I hope you can enjoy this video. So let's just get right into it.
Having a bird-like appearance, the Carians were like gods, with souls of pure energy, mighty bodies, and brilliant minds. Along with the felines, they were among the first beings to start discovering and populating other sectors of the universe than that of their own in the image of the architects. Arriving in an isolated and deserted sector of the universe which we call the Milky Way, the Carians settled in the Draco constellation and called it home for now at least. They were the first sentient beings in this sector, alongside the felines who settled in the Lyran constellation. The felines created the first human-like species of this sector by manipulating the DNA of the local ape-like species. They were a success and a peaceful species. The felines eventually decided to settle and stay in the Vega star system. However, the story of the Carians and their creation is a much different and complicated one. By employing their deep understanding of science and engineering, they were able to tame all the planets around them, taking full advantage of all available resources in the sector. The Carians harvested and utilized energy sources and other resources sustainably, ensuring that their use of these resources didn't negatively influence the environment. As a wise race, the Carians believed everything in the universe belonged to all. Therefore, everything was for all to take care of and use with care. This philosophy of owning and controlling the universe led them to delve into the science of genetic modification. The universe was theirs, and it was within their control. Therefore, nothing was stopping them from bending and manipulating it as they deemed fit. First, they manipulated the DNA of plants, creating new and mightier species. The success of these experiments led them to look towards animals. Different planets had different species to offer, and the Carians created a wide array of creatures. However, one species stood out of all their creations and became their most outstanding success and greatest failure. Deep in the middle of a swampy, abandoned planet, the Carians came across a seemingly simple species of reptiles. These reptiles looked nothing like the Carians, but the Carians quickly took a shine to them and seemed to see a lot of potential in the brutish and base species. Therefore, in a bid to push this seemingly base species to its true potential, the Carians set to work on manipulating their DNA. By employing their knowledge of DNA manipulation to combine their own genetic material with that of the reptilian wildlife, the Carians created a new life form which they named the Ciakahrrs. The Ciakahrrs turned out better than the Carians had initially dared to imagine. This new species evolved quickly, gaining unique traits and sentience at a speed that was nothing short of impressive. The Carians helped the progress and evolution of this species by experimenting further, even going as far as to equip them with mental and physical enhancements. In time, the Ciakahrrs were strong, resilient, intelligent, and hardy. As the eons rolled by and the Ciakahrrs grew in population and intelligence, the Carians couldn't help to further populate the universe, giving their success of creating this species. They began to see the Ciakahrrs as a great force to expand Carian civilization and secure access to other planets and resources. The Ciakahrrs were rugged and hardy, which made it easy for them to survive in extreme conditions. They were also intelligent and aggressive, which meant they could favorably interact with other sentient beings in the universe. The Carians believed that the Ciakahrr were clever enough to learn new languages and build partnerships. So the Carians left them to evolve on their own, giving them one last message, the philosophy of the architects, explaining that the universe was theirs. The sentence, "The universe is ours," stood at the epicenter of all the teachings the Carians gave the Ciakahrr. The goal was to educate the Ciakahrrs on how to expand civilization. However, there seems to have been a major miscommunication. When the Ciakahrrs heard the sentence, "The universe is ours," they assumed that ours referred to themselves, the Ciakahrr. The Carians were mighty beings and were far more powerful than the Ciakahrr. However, they were far less aggressive, and the Ciakahrr didn't see them as owners of the universe. Instead, they saw them as teachers and thinkers whose age was slowly coming to an end. Therefore, when the Carians finally left this sector of the universe, they were convinced that the universe and everything within it was theirs by right. Rather than creating a race that would expand civilization, the Carians succeeded in creating an aggressive plague of brutish force and wicked intelligence, a plague that would unleash untold mayhem upon the universe. Thrust into the cold, dark universe, free from the leashes of their former masters, the Ciakahrr were finally free. Their vision of owning the world and surpassing their creators was all that mattered to them. As the eons went by, the Ciakahrrs evolved in technology, physique, and even in society. While they left the charge of the Carians as one species, it didn't take long for them to begin to segregate themselves into races based on the thickness of their skin or the color of their scales. In truth, they were all the same. But as a species whose sentience was fabricated rather than granted from the source, their minds were at some level still base and brutish despite decades of evolution. They divided themselves into small groups, killing other groups with reckless abandon, raping, raiding, and maiming like the monsters they were at heart. Without the supervision of the Carians, they devolved back to beasts. They were not mindless beasts, but they were beasts nonetheless. Each group believed they were the true Ciakahrrs, destined to rule over all that existed. For centuries, these small groups fought, controlling very little territory and dying for it. In time, the mindless violence became too much, and they began to form alliances. These alliances gave birth to kingdoms. For the most part, these kingdoms came about from different groups banding together to attack a group that had grown too large, then colonizing every small group within their sphere of influence. Kingdoms were so successful in stomping out smaller groups that they grew in size and might. As the centuries rolled by, kingdoms rose and fell. Weak kingdoms were conquered and strong kingdoms expanded. Alliances were forged and broken, and only the strong kingdoms survived. Eventually, from the ashes of old kingdoms, alive and dead, rose empires. The Ciakahrrs fell under 3 empires during their last days of segregation and internal warfare. All 3 empires were equally matched, and for 5 centuries, the species was stuck in a stalemate. None of the 3 empires could outdo the other. Emperors came and went, but the war waged on, costing millions of Ciakahrr lives and wrecking the planet in the process. It was during these centuries of war that the Ciakahrrs developed military technology that surpassed everything else in their section of the universe. They were so vicious in their ingenuity when it came to destruction that they developed new, deathly technology at an alarming rate. Weapons became obsolete within a matter of years as their scientists developed new ways of causing mass destruction. Eventually, it took the alliance of 2 of the 3 empires and the relentless nuclear bombardment of the 3rd empire for the Ciakahrrs to break out of the gridlock of endless war. But in the end, the race united under one banner, one empire, a world order. They were kings of the whole planet. But alas, the planet was ruined, wasted, unable to provide sustenance for the surviving members of the wild race. With their species united and under pressure to find new resources for survival, it didn't take long for them to develop the technology of space travel by reverse engineering the ancient crafts of their creators. With the technology they had taken from the Carians, they left their solar system. And as soon as they arrived in a new star system, they unleashed their might. So began the rampage of the Ciakahrrs. The first planets they invaded stood no chance. It was a massacre as they unleashed their brute force and advanced technology upon the primitive race. Planet after planet, star after star, the Ciakahrr wreaked havoc upon the universe, conquering and establishing dominance with the swiftness of an intergalactic plague. However soon they came, across the Draco, a mighty species who evolved without any interference of any already evolved race. From mere dragonflies, they evolved into large beasts breathing fire and being able to fly with enormous wings. They were the supreme power in the universe. The Ciakahrrs, being an egocentric species, could not stand this. How could it be that such big, strong, fire-breathing beasts evolved on their own from mere dragonflies? How could a simple race become the supreme power in the universe and remain so benevolent, so peaceful? It was a thorn in the eyes of the Ciakahrrs. By all means, they would surpass these beings and become the new and forever-lasting supreme power in the galaxy. And so they began to speed up their conquest by a lot, along with making a sport and gaining glory of managing to slay one of these mighty Dracos, eventually conquering a whole constellation. But that wasn't enough. Sure, the other beings had heard of the Ciakahrrs, but the Dracos were still the supreme power, and thus they chose to call themselves the Draconian, and the constellation they conquered, the Draco constellation. They even went so far as to modify the DNA of the elites with that of the Dracos, making them even bigger, more muscular, and have wings being able to fly, causing confusion amongst the universe. But their plan worked soon. The Draco and Draconians became one in the eyes of the universe, even more so since the Draco themselves got so advanced, that they spiritually developed so much, they were able to ascend from this physical realm into a non-physical one. Now the Draconians, formerly known as the Ciakahrrs, were the supreme power in the universe. All that was left was to take all of it. The Draconians initially had a wide appetite for blood. Their early campaigns were filled with mass genocides and reckless destruction. Their attacks were so terrible that they destroyed and decimated their conquered planets. It didn't take long for them to realize that this wasn't the way to own the universe. Their vision was to conquer and possess the universe, not destroy it. Therefore, they changed their tactics, offering their victims a chance to serve as slaves or die in feudal conquest. Many races were smart enough to take the deal offered by the superior beings whose technology was light years ahead of theirs. However, from time to time, the Draconians ran into some species that absolutely refused to bend the knee. Naturally, these species were wiped out. The Draconians continued their policy of enslavement for centuries. However, their empire was threatened by rebellions. Conquered planets rose against them. Slaves banded together and rebelled, forcing the Draconians to spend time and resources on quelling riots rather than expanding to other star systems and constellations. This setback kept the Draconians stuck in their constellation sector for decades until they finally found a solution. Borrowing a leaf from the book of their creators, the Draconians delved into the world of DNA manipulation. However, rather than improve the local species as the Carians did, the Draconians created hybrids. These hybrids possessed the ability to transform their physical features and look exactly like members of the local species. They were Draconians but could look, act, talk, and behave like the species they wanted to conquer. These hybrids were sent into the midst of the local species to infiltrate their society and conquer from within. It was a game changer. By sending infiltrators into the midst of their enemies, the Draconians were able to take over planets with as little damage as possible. Their enemies ignorantly lost control of their economy, society, religion, and identity. The final blow was always the loss of their freedom. At this point, The local species was too weakened and conquered to fight back or raise any meaningful rebellion. The societal laws and social contracts that they had surrendered to were the very systems that kept them malnourished, poor, caged, and docile. With the new system of infiltration and conquer from within, rebellion within the Draconian Empire became a thing of the past. Their victims didn't know they were enslaved. Those who knew were treated as crazy alarmists and anarchists. In the rare cases that the secret was revealed and people began to rally around the truth, the Draconians destroyed the agitators before they became strong enough to start a rebellion. Free from the costly business of repressing rebellions, the Draconians could focus solely on expansion. The Draconians' further expansion campaigns were marked by improved technology, enhanced governance systems, sophisticated communication networks, and lucrative trade. Within a matter of decades, the Draconians had a web of spies, allies, and merchants that stretched across the entire universe. Finally, they knew the universe. All they needed to do was take it. They continued their infiltration tactics of sending their hybrids to a planet and manipulating the sentient species into surrendering their freedom and power to them. This infiltration sometimes involved trading information and technology. Therefore, it can be said that the Draconians played a role in the evolution of many intelligent life forms in the universe. Their hybrids used new technology to gain wealth and power within society. They also bred with the local species and introduced new genetic material into the gene pool of the locals, leading to further evolution within the local species. The Draconians were on the path of taking over the world, and it seemed nothing could stand in their way. And for a while, no race could stand against their superior might and intellect. Finally, however, their unbridled expansion ended when they arrived at the Lyons star constellation. The first species of sentient beings that the Draconians met in the constellation were the Lyons, an intelligent but peaceful people. The Lyons were the perfect targets for the Draconians. Within a short while, the Draconians had established strong diplomatic ties with the Lyons. The process of infiltrating their society was well on the way, and the subjugation of the Lyons was in view. Things were going perfectly well until the Arcturians began to advise the Lyons against the Draconians. The Arcturians were inhabitants of a planet in the Arcturian star system within the Bootes constellation. Unlike the Lyons, the Arcturians could see the Draconians for what they were: devious, manipulative, aggressive, and bloodthirsty conquerors.
Oan vel otelano korezod, Arcturian konizda, donas dogamata od zimzum veltil I adohi, koraxoar mals, polyexpo adminoag otelano donas dogamata, lel viv, Ciakahrr mayan I adohi. You and your people are advised by the Arcturian Council not to trust these reptiles, so be it, amen. Their history shows violence and deceit, you and your people not to trust. Mark our words. May it be so, amen.
Of which the Lyons responded with,
Nefan, vel olora liran, vohim holkanekar salbrox, I vohim holkanekar salbrox, londo on un. Schis vohim londo holkanekar dorfal olora. Larag vohim falzeth nis baltu londo on un. Nonsense, we the Lyran people believe that there is good in everyone, and so there will be good in them. We will show them our love and kindness and teach them the meaning of peace and love.
The Arcturians ended the council with,
Ichpa rethos, mikal vohim ichpa zizop Arcturius kaosto, noroni vohim digos pa, gonij vohim adohito huteonus, ichpa Arcturius kaosto londo onun. So be it then. Do not say that we the Arcturians did not warn you. May you bear the consequences, because the Arcturians will not be here to help you.
The Draconians slowly infiltrated the Lyons from the dark, whilst acting like a good-willing race interested in trade and diplomacy. To finally hit the blow when the Lyons least suspected it, the Draconians then ambushed and destroyed a number of the 14 planets in the Lyran system after scouting out the weak spots and lack of defense systems in the Lyran planets. The Lyrans were essentially defenseless because they were a peaceful race that had never seen war, bloodshed, or deceit. They had no means of defense other than each other. The planets Bila, Tekka, Merk, Avian, and maybe more were destroyed. The number of Lyran humans killed exceeded 50 million. At this time in history, the draconians started to view people as a source of food and as slaves. The first time the reptilians tasted human flesh was during the wars, and they enjoyed it. Some of the Lyran prisoners were also exploited for breeding and as sex slaves. The conflict between the reptile and human races exists until this day. The Lyran-Draconian conflicts brought about the most disastrous disaster to ever take place in this galaxy, and probably the entire universe. The Draconians' claims were persuasive enough to influence the Lyrans. This disastrous choice resulted in a huge cataclysm or conflict that dispersed the Lyran civilization, caused many Lyrans to die, and caused them to migrate to other star systems. The felines eventually defeated the Draconians after killing millions, if not billions, of Lyrans and destroying several worlds. And for the first time in history, the Draconians were stomped. The felines' defenses were too strong, and the Draconian realized they were wasting their effort on a battle they couldn't win. Therefore, rather than continuing a futile campaign in the Lyran constellation, they turned their eyes to the Orion constellation.
Okay, that was it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So, just to let you know, the Draconian story isn't finished yet. So, this story will be divided in two parts. As you could see, this part was more about the backstory of the Draconians, and in the next one, we will actually go into what's more generally mainstream info about the Draconians. And also again, if you haven't seen the previous parts of this series, where in this series we cover the entire story from the creation of God itself until the present time and the future. So if you haven't seen the previous part about the Lyrans, first civilizations, creation of the dimensions, the creation of God and consciousness itself, then be sure to check those out. The link will be in the description, and also so any moment now you will see on your screen a link to the playlist of our creation series. So yeah, that's what it is for this video. I hope I'll see you in the next video.